Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. Are you okay? That's good. Okay. I just want to thank the staff at University that organised this. About and it's like that professionalism in teaching. Because the occupying the idea actually in our own learning of the learning of others. So, it's what we do. I can see lots of books, I can see very much people like this. It's fantastic. For example, doctrine, for example, it's kind of inquiry, many about groups, how do I, what I'm doing, and you build in your work. Now, your ideas are about each one of us. That your own values, unions, that's you're actually working on with your practice. And that's why we need which is you are actually generating your own explanation. This is really difference. Explanation. It's called a process. generate your education from your practice and also your own values as fully as possible. This is why I'm here on visuals. Because I can talk to you like actually say 15 minutes. I can work. Like just democracy. Actually, no, not over time. And you qualify things through practice. Research, not professionalism. Now, that's professionalism. Or legitimacy, the regulars, the professionals, really important. Generating your own contribution to professional you have actually mastered in terms of your sense of professionalism. Doing what they actually requires practice. As these contribute to your knowledge, brand the thing, not fortnight. Group was already done. For example, Shibani, as a center of critical education, looking at with your practice, frequency my lifetime things that I've given some including actually being a friend also and share as a way of where just recently got that self-study, teaching, education. This one, educational research, talking about self-study, to download from that website, actionresearch.net. From that website, actionresearch.net. Researchers by Bonco and Markia, where the pupils, 9-year-old pupils, were being shown to be action researchers in their own right, that they could actually inquire into and reflect on their own learning and their own practice. And as pedagogues, that's a term we don't use much in the UK, but in Europe, it's quite common to think of yourself as a pedagogue, and both Branco and Markia examined and explained their educational influence in their own learning and the learning of others. So what I'll do now, because I'm going to come back now and I'm going to stop sharing, excuse me, that what I'm just urging you all to do is to access those resources, but not with the sense of the sage on the stage. But I love that notion of the guide on the side, where you are going to be committed to sharing your explanations of your own practice from your ground of your educational practice with your question, how do I improve what I'm doing in my educational practice? Now, often we use action cycles, action research cycles to get us going, but in action research, there is no necessary condition to produce a validated explanation of your educational influence in learning. And that's why I tend to go from my action research, using the action research cycle, into sharing the living educational theories as explanations of our educational influence. Now, I hope that's, if you like, clear in what I'm urging you to do. In the Croatian seminar an hour ago, we had the chat facility working, and people were actually, after going into pairs, they put into the chat the values that they were willing to be accountable for living as fully as they can within their practice. And I know at Sardar Patel University on the life skills program that researchers are doing the same thing, that you're actually sharing your own inquiries. Now, I'll leave you just one thought. If you go into the What's New section of my website, you'll be able to go down to the presentations made at the American Educational Research Association about 3 weeks ago with the theme of educational responsibility. And you will see that Shivani's paper is in there as a contribution to a global network. So it's moved from Sardar Patel University, which I know has got a mission which focuses on the contribution in the Indian context. Whereas what Shivani was doing was taking the quality of the work, and Swaroop does this again. Swaroop was doing this yesterday with students from Swaroop Patel, and actually sharing the knowledge being generated by Sardar Patel staff and students, and sharing it globally. And that's what I'm hoping, that you will all see yourselves as literally citizen scholars, global educators. Mark Potts is present, and Mark actually introduced the idea of living global citizenship. And he's created democracy cafes within a city within the UK. And again, the research is continuing into that practice. Swaroop has taken the ideas from Mark in Mark's doctorate and also what's happening in Salisbury. And I know Swaroop has actually developed some of those in Indian context from Sardar Patel University. Pip Bruce Ferguson is present. Pip has actually acted as an examiner, for example, for Ariane Brigani's living theory thesis.
and that has been now legitimated, the first one at the University of Lancaster. So we're all playing our part in spreading the influence of living educational theory research in these global contexts, as well as actually continuing, like I've done with Brian Williamson, to focus on our individual practice. So Brian and myself have got a paper in the issue of eJolts that is coming out, which is actually looked at what is called meta-analysis. Now, I learned this from Brian, so I am still, 50 odd years into my research, learning new things, which I find very exciting, and bringing those into my own living educational theory. And I thank Brian for introducing me to that. And literally, Brian acted as my mentor in actually developing those ideas with me. So we've all got this opportunity now to live out our values more fully in our practice, but more than anything, it is sharing them and actually seeing that through our conversations, and Marie's paper yesterday was actually on, and also today on educational conversations, how to start these, and then sharing it on the new posters, and then going as far as you like, even up to a doctoral thesis, as you develop your ideas in your practice, especially in living your own values, which you believe are counting towards the flourishing of humanity. This is really crucial. So I'm hoping in this brief introduction that I've excited you to go to that data archive. It's very difficult using these numbers to participate together, but we often have chat facilities that can be made public. You've got my email on the end of my web page, and I know that we can actually sustain this conversation. And Swaroop is doing this for years, also Shivani from Sardel Patel University. And I just want to thank once again this opportunity to introduce the ideas, and hopefully we can sustain the connections in these conversations and see what's happening as we all continue to improve our practice, enhance our professionalism, but in particular through living our values of humanity as fully as possible. Okay, now my time is up, so I'm going to actually stop there and say thank you very much to Swaroop and Shivani and pass it back to them.
Mukshita?
Thank you, Mukshita. Sorry for the technical glitch. Somehow it's not working. Anyway, so now we have a session of panel members, and 3 panelists is going to speak on their own experience about the living education theory and how they have put it in the practice. So before going for a panel before going for the panel discussions, let me share that, why we thought of to go for a panel discussions and why we thought of to work on this living educationals webinar. The reason is simple, is that we all teachers, because by now we came to know that 70% of teachers have enrolled the webinar, and the 70% of the teachers, they thought of to be part of our program. The reason is very simple, because we all are moving towards the quality of an education, whether it is a school educations or whether we are talking about the education at higher level. All are working towards that. So in my own experience, when I worked in the living theory, and with the opportunity given by Professor Jack, I had presented my paper at ALRA, and I came to know that we all are working on to achieve the sustainable developmental goals, and we all want the quality of an education. So this is what I believe, that when I put the living theory things in the practice, I understand my own values, I consciously applied my values, and then I thought of to put it in actions, and that put me in a competent. I think this is all the teachers are have to work upon, then only we can thought of to work. And so I myself always says that, it's for me, it's a funeral approach, where I can understand what the things is all about and how can I work on the quality of an education. So our first panel member, Professor Jack Whitehead, is a former president of British Educational Research. I'm fortunate enough to meet him in the ERA and the BERA conference, and I came to know about this theory. And he's a visiting professor and university in China and the University of Cambodia. And this is what he already shared about his action research. And this is, for me, is also a source of information to have a more understanding of living theory as well as the action research. Our second panel member, Dr. Swaroop Rawal. We all know her. She's awarded degree from the University of Worcester, both DLIT too. And passions were already covered by Professor Jack also, passions toward life skill educations and work at, I always say that she has worked at the Pan India, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan, whatnot. And at presently, she, last 3 years, she associated with our department. And I think the fourth batch this time we are going to run on the life skill educations. And the outcome, if someone will ask me what the outcome of this life skill education is, very simple. All our students are employable in their own professions. Not only that, one or two students have work on their startups. So that shows the positive outcome of the course that we thought of to work on, as well as the living theory. We all know that she is listed in top teachers for the global prize. Dr. Pippi Ferguson, it's a first meeting with me or her. With me, New Zealander, has worked in the education, most of her working in the primary schools, and she worked on the staff developmental rules. Various tertiary institutions she has worked on, New Zealand, England, Ireland, and glad to know that she is also a mentors and the researchers, and she's also the person who has constantly worked on the LET. Several challenges that she has worked upon. Just 2 weeks back, I came to know that she has also worked with our social work students. So, of course, how to articulate the values, how to put it in the practice, they are more available. So I'm fortunate enough and welcome all the panel members to share their thoughts with us, and again, enrich us for their professional competence and enhance our own well-being. Thank you so much. Over to you. And Professor Jack.
Yes, of course. And Dr. Jack Whitehead will be speaking too. But I'm going to begin. And so thank you very much, Shivani and Sardar Patel and all the faculty members. Especially thanks for, having this. Well, I'm not going to get into all that right now. I'm just going to get to my talk. And I'm going to try to explain how values can continue to energize my lifelong learning and influence how they help me influence my education, the education of others, and in the social formation. What are the values I embody in my practice and my living? My alliance is to educational creativity, originality, democracy, service, love, empathy, competence, a sense of hope and continuous learning. Of course, all of us, as everybody knows, we have a long list of values. Jack says constellation of values, and they move up and down in the constellation. But I particularly named these because last year sometime I got up in the morning and I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? The new normal has set in. Physical distancing, masks, online learning, lecture format, because that's what I thought online learning was. And this is everything I positively was critical about all my life. I have invested hours and hours and hours of my life and my educational values in trying to create experiential learning curriculums, trying to get teachers to understand verbalization is not good, banking education is hopeless, that's not how we teach. And I get up in the morning, suddenly I realize that that's all I'm going to be able to do now. Believe me, for the first time in my life, I didn't want to get out of bed. And that's one of the sure signs of a beginning of a depression. It's terrible. You saw the world crumbling around you in the pandemic. You saw children's education being neglected. And I had written a line in my PhD which said that I'm going to try to enhance the learning of every child, every student in my country. I'm not going to give up at this age. I can't give up. But I could not get out of bed either because it was such a sad scenario. If my aim as an educator is to work towards a good social order, if I was to strive for human betterment, I needed to ask myself some questions. And I asked myself, do I accept and am I living out my values fully as I can? Am I assisting in the creation of knowledge excellence in my practice while I'm working for the good of the community? No, I wasn't. I was giving up so easily. I was just giving up. I had no hope. But that's not what my living educational theory supported. I had to negate the contradictions I was experiencing. I had to stop. I had to get up. And I had to think about what I would do. For me, community means firstly, my educational community. And I am so blessed that my educational community is working towards the larger community too, because my students are social work students. So I was like, what am I going to be doing? I cannot sit here saying I cannot enhance my learning and the learning of others. I cannot say that I will not improve. I will not say I cannot innovate. I cannot say I will not be creative. I cannot say I give up hope, because these were my values. I had to do something about it. Of course, at this point, I would say I was really lucky when I had a dear friend, a critical friend, who's Shivani Mishra. And she said, no, Swaroop ma'am, I'm not letting you give up. You have to come online. So I said, if I give up, I'm going to be an absconder. I have made a commitment towards education. And my values are very strongly committed towards that. So I said, get up and start moving. And that's what I did. I started thinking about everything that's wrong in online learning. I realized that online learning had become, it's the same as what it was in the classroom. Can you believe it? I had a parent who told me that her son has not seen his 8th standard teacher since 3 months because all she does is share the book. That's shameful. So I decided to cut down what is called the transactional distance and change my pedagogy. I changed the whole psychology besides it. And this is not about the physical distance between the students. It's that communication gap. It's the gap when you can't reach out to your students. That needs to be cut down. And I cut that down by having a dialogue with my students. I cut that down by changing the whole structure of my program. I changed from drama and education, which I've been doing all my life, and I brought in cinema and education. I brought in the radio. I brought in online games. Believe me, it was hard work, but it's my values and my commitment towards continuous learning, towards competence, towards the students of my country. And I said, I just have to get up and do that. And I did it. I have a few things to share with you. One of my students, she said she never thought of anything without, she did not think about values. She did not know what values were. She did not know where to look for her strength. And now every single decision she takes, she thinks about her values, where she's contradicting them in her practice. And now she thinks of how she would negate that contradiction. This wonderful girl would be writing reflections every day in the classroom. And I asked her one day, why are you writing it? She says, a lot of people have reflections which I don't know. And now she tries to answer the question about how am I unique? How am I different? Because she thinks there is something special for her there out in the world. One of my faculty, she was so wanting to do this program, but she thought it was just a hyped up program. And then she had a notion that it was chaotic because we were talking all the time and having a great time. Halfway through, she realized that, wow, it's really worth it. I'm learning a lot, but it's not probably contributing to the students' learning. But after reading the reflective diaries, she's realized that this program has transformed them and it has far-reaching consequences because of its specialness. One of my other students from social work HR who said that life skill is a total package and it's something that we really need for all of us. So I asked myself, and I answered this question, how can I contribute towards enhancing human flourishing in my organization and the community with the help of my living educational theory? So this is what it's all about. It's about your values. It's about getting up and doing it. It's about asking yourself, how can I improve my practice? I have something to share, but I think I've closed all the windows and I lost it. So I'm going to not share it right now. It was a link which had my email ID and all the published works and books of my work. But as I speak, I will share it with you. You can find me on Twitter at YoSwaroop. You can find me on Koo again at @YoSwaroop. And if you want to write to me, you can write to me at nemlifeskills@gmail.com. nemlifeskills@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mokshita.
Thank you, Mokshita. Could you put up the first slide, please? While Mokshita is doing that, I wanted to talk about professionalism and teaching.
There you are.
The line that I'm teacher that will do, that's saying you're going to hear me say, we do the best we know how, and when we know better, we do better. it's something I regularly say to my new teachers because they beat themselves up for not doing the best job they can. And yet we're on a growth journey together. So my question to you, you teachers out there, is what will it take? What stimulus or lever or sometimes earthquake will it take for you to change your practice, to become a better teacher? For me, the most effective way has been living educational theory. But I'm going to take you on a quick journey through how I got to that point. As Shivani said in the introduction, I trained as a primary school teacher in New Zealand. In primary school teaching, they have a very good emphasis on pedagogy and the curriculum and how to deliver the curriculum, but there's very little emphasis on reflection. I never had a critical friend, and I very rarely ever got observed when I was teaching. So as far as I was concerned, I was doing a good job. I left primary school teaching to have my family, and when I went back into education, apart from the education that goes on when you're bringing up children, I got into adult education and I became a staff developer in a polytechnic. And I have done staff development work in polytechnics and universities and research leading in a Māori university. In the polytechnic sector, even if you are teacher trained as I was, you're required to do what they call tutor training, 12 weeks of it, in 2-week blocks. One of those weeks blocks involved studying what it takes to be a reflective practitioner. And it makes you look at how your own practice is developing. It gives you tools for reflection. When I was teaching that course myself subsequently, one of my midwifery students wrote, and I thought it was really good expression, I've never forgotten it. It is reflection that is able to turn experience into informed and committed action. That was a Pacific Island midwifery person called Moana Shortland. Her words stuck in my mind because it was such a good thing. It is reflection that is able to turn experience into informed and committed action. So I was learning some tools. I went on and did master's study. And in my master's, I based my exploration of who was disadvantaged in the New Zealand educational system on the pedagogy of Paulo Freire. Swaroop has already referred to banking education, and a little later in my talk, I'm going to be talking about papers which are on e-jolts by 3 Indian lecturers, educators, Nima Parikh, Rashita Yukani, and Swaroop herself. Rashita and Swaroop wrote the paper together. And the Freirean expression of banking education comes up in some of their work too. It gave me some further tools for developing critical awareness. And as a result of that, I decided to go on and do a doctoral study alongside my practice as a staff developer. Part of my teacher training in the polytech sector, because I was already trained as a teacher, I was able to opt to do something that wasn't usually offered, and it was course and action research. That to me was an eye-opener, particularly when you got into the kind of critical action research that Kemmis and McTaggart recommended. That moved me from looking outwards at teacher practice to looking at the wider systemic influences that we can investigate and explore. In 1994, I won a British Council Fellowship and went to the UK, which is where I met Jean and McNiff and Jack Whitehead, both of whose writings I had come across as action researchers. Jack's book, The Growth of Educational Knowledge, really woke me up to what you can do to investigate and address injustices in your own practice. And his further work after that in developing living educational theory gave me for the first time the concept of using a mirror, not just tools to look at practice out there, but the mirror that gets you to look at your own practice and whether and how you might be complicit in denying your values in your practice. the idea of being a living educational contradiction I found absolutely fascinating, because it made me think for the first time, in what ways is my practice, perhaps, despite my best intentions, not working well for those that I'm teaching and working with? I subsequently wrote a paper with my husband, who's lurking in the background over there and was also in the Polytechnic at the time, called Can the Goldfish See the Water? And it was an exploration of how, despite our good intentions, aspects of our practice were not working well for cohorts of students. In Bruce's case, it was Indian and Chinese students whose realities he did not understand when they were trying to cope with adjusting to the way we do education in New Zealand. In my case, it was my practice as a research manager in the Māori University in helping them to enter and negotiate a research assessment exercise, and not recognizing how that form of judgment from a largely Western perspective didn't work well for Māori. So I accredit living educational theory with giving me that desire to actually investigate my own practice and to see whether I was doing what I thought I was doing. In the papers by Nima Parekh and the one that Rashita and Swaroop did, they address the realities of the Indian educational system and how aspects of that might cause them to practice differently from the way they would prefer based on their own values, but finding themselves in a system that subverts or works against those values. And I think that is very important work for us all to do, because we're all caught in a web of ways of operating that are traditional and often reinforced by dominant groups, but they don't necessarily work well for other groups. Nima's paper particularly almost mirrors, she wrote the paper in 2018, I think. It almost mirrors a paper that I wrote, which you'll see, you'll be able to access from the links at the end and the slide at the end, where I was looking at the influence of action research and living educational theory on my development as a researcher, as an educator. Swaroop and Rashita talk about how Rashita was dragged into teaching because of family needs, and moving from being a very reluctant teacher to learning how to love her kids and gaining self-confidence through the work she was doing with Swaroop in the living... Sorry, Swaroop, I've lost the plot there for a minute. Life skills through drama. Yep, kia ora. So for you, what is going to motivate you to want to be a more professional educator? Is it just focusing on the curriculum? That won't get you far. You have to do that to teach effectively. But what is actually going to transform your practice and help you to see what impact you're having on your students? I think if you look at living educational theory and the wide range of resources that Jack has put up in his slides, and the amazing examples of practice that you will see in EJOLTS, you will find ways of doing it. One of my social work educators that I worked with when I was in the Polytech sector found herself caught in a bind between having values of wanting to do the best by her students, but finding herself in a professional environment where she was forced to quieten down what she was saying so that she didn't upset apple carts. And it's that kind of tension that we find ourselves in as teachers, that living educational theory can help us to investigate and give us tools to work towards. So, Mukshita, if you wouldn't mind sharing the last slide, from which people will be able to pick up those links. I understand these slides will be available subsequently. And finally, remember, we do the best we know how, and when we know better, we do better. And if you log into Living Educational Theory, you will find a very effective way of doing better. Thank you very much to Sadhu Patel. University for facilitating this, and thank you all for listening.
We're waiting for her slide, Mokshita.
Thank you, Mokshita. As long as people have got access to that, that's all I'm worried about. But do look at the work by the Indian teachers, because it is quite exemplary.
Yes, thank you again. Yeah, I've really enjoyed both with Swaroop and with Pip. There are qualities that they are both living and have sustained over many years in terms of passion for education. And I just want to highlight something which I think you will all appreciate. And it comes out of something when I was in my 20s, I actually focused on, and one was called Ontological Despair, which is where Swaroop is saying about not wanting to get up in the morning, that you have very little purpose. Now, I was helped by the work of Eric Fromm, and he said, if you can face the truth without panic, you will realize there is no purpose to life other than the one you give to your own life through your own loving relationships and productive work. Now, I just want to emphasize that we've each got that capacity to make the kind of decision which is actually flowing with a life-affirming energy. You know, we can all feel ontological despair, but we can also get up in the morning with an energy and feeling that what we're doing in education is really worthwhile, and we can share our practice with others with the values which are hopeful and optimistic about the future of humanity. So that's one thing there from Swaroop I do think we could all benefit from. And you might think this is a bit of a red herring, but I worked with a female professor at Bath University called Judy Marshall. She then went to Lancaster University. Judy was always encouraging me not to omit gender issues from my research. Now, actually, I want to just stress that a little bit in terms of the quality of relationships that you can establish in terms of your inquiries in living theory research. This is not to deny that the men can't actually have these relationships at all, but it's just saying, look, I do think Judy was right, that to emphasize the quality of the relationships often have a gendered bias. And the women, it feels to me, have got a quality of nurturing, of awareness, of sensitivity to the emotion of others. I know men can have this as well, but it's just that that seems very important. And when Pip actually talks about reflection and how that reflection can help you then to motivate you from the experience that you're having, again, to improve your practice, I think it's grounded in that kind of hopeful and loving energy. It's life-affirming. And what I think you'll find, if you look at your pictures, just the pictures on the websites that you put up on this, that's quite a lot of you. You will see you are full of smiling and energy. The ones that you choose to share with people have got that energy within them. And that is important, not to deny the importance of those qualities, which often come out in conversation and dialogue. So that is what I just want to really affirm what Swaroop has been saying there about the importance of that decision of yours to actually get up with hope and actually feel that you've got an energy which is actually productive and worthwhile. And then with Pip, that sense of the real critical import of reflection. And I'd also see about the notion of the difference between reflection and being reflexive, where being reflexive, you become aware of the values which are actually informing your practice and your knowledge. And the last point I'll make is how important what Pip mentioned, and this was in the early 80s, when I was working with the ideas from Wilf Carr and Stephen Kemmis about becoming critical, knowing through action research. That what they did, which really inspired me, was go to the work of a critical social theorist called Jürgen Habermas. And what that work did was actually highlight the importance of what Pip was saying about the Indian researchers being aware of the constraints within the society, which sometimes are disempowering. And it's coming to understand the nature of those social influences, which can inform your inquiry. And you can bring those into the generation of your own living educational theory. And that's why I like Mark Potter's work so much about embracing the idea of being a living global citizen. You know, that this idea that we're not just educators, we're not just parents, or what, we're actually citizens within our society, and also global citizens, which Sardo Patel University, through the Life School program and what they're doing, are exemplifying in terms of the webinar now that you've organized, which is actually having this kind of global influence with 1,000 people plus that actually registered. So this is really important, I think, that we learn how to continue to develop these inquiries, but in particular with these values that Sarupa's been expressing as she's been talking, but that crucial decision that Sarup took, and I know Pip has, in terms of that, you know, it's understanding the world. This is what comes out of Michael Polanyi's personal knowledge. Understand the world from your point of view as a person claiming originality and exercising judgment responsibly with universal intent. So this is the ground of personal knowledge, but it's also connected socially to what it is we're all trying to do with living our values of human flourishing as fully as we can. Is that okay? I'll just pause there. Okay.
Super, thanks a lot, Jack, because it takes me straight to the first question that's asked to you.
Okay.
And it's from Nalini. And I would really like to tell everybody we've got wonderful participants and listeners from all over the world. We've got people from New Zealand, Mongolia, all over India. We've got people from South Africa, England, Croatia, Italy. So here's Nalini. Dear Nalini, how are you? She asks you, Jack, what are your thoughts on flourishing of all entities, human and non-human, in sustainability of our planet?
Yeah, it's a really crucial question because of a particular movement, a movement of knowledge which is known as post-humanism. Now, actually, it sounds strange because I don't want to lose the sense of humanism. But post-humanism doesn't lose the values of humanity. It stresses that we should not just be human-centered. So when I talk about that energy, that sense of a life-affirming energy, it is cosmological. It's pre-human and post-human. It carries that energy for living. Now, that then takes us into this notion of sustainability, because we can't survive as a human race if we ignore the climate that we're actually destroying. That we cannot go on. You look at what's going on in the world, in Yemen, the violence, the killings, the warfare. We've got to do something about these, which takes us out of what this guy Maxwell, who's just published a book on what he calls wisdom inquiry. He doesn't deny what he calls knowledge inquiry. You know, we all contributed to knowledge inquiry, but he actually says we've got to concentrate on what he calls wisdom inquiry, which is what we're doing in education, which is actually live values of human flourishing as fully as possible. But it's carried by an energy which is cosmological, which is life-affirming, and actually brings in exactly what you're focusing on with your question, which is we've got to actually take care of the planet, which actually is non-human in many of its aspects, but without taking care of that, we as a species, as a human species, won't survive. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jack. Jack, one more for you, but I'm sure Pip can even help us with it. And first how did you get this idea of the living educational theory?
It was in the early 1970s, and I'd been teaching for 5 years as a science teacher, and I'd also studied 4 years part-time at the London Institute in terms of an academic diploma in philosophy and psychology and a master's in psychology. And what my philosophy professors told me was that educational theory was made up of philosophy, psychology, sociology, and history of education. And what I discovered as I was teaching, that not one of those theories, either individually or together, could produce a valid explanation of my educational influence in my own learning and the learning of my pupils. And so what I then did was say, look, my vocation is changing. I had a delight in being a science teacher, but in 1972, because of that knowledge that our very educational theory in our profession was mistaken, I actually went to the University of Bath, where I stayed all my working professional life, to see if I could actually generate a form of educational theory that could actually explain an individual's educational influence in their own learning and the learning of others. You draw on the disciplines of education, you draw insights from them, but you reject the discipline's approach to educational theory, which said that this theory, if you like, can explain the individual's educational influence. Okay?
Thank you. Pip, would you like to answer this question? It has to do with our living educational theory. It is very difficult to be honest with the self. How does one do that?
I think it's extremely difficult to be honest with the self. Reflecting on my own practice, I think our capacity for self-delusion is huge. And one of the ways that I have been helped to address that has been through submitting papers to eJolts, which are available for critical review. And the eJolts panel allocate 2 or 3, I think it's 3 now, Marie,
reviewers, yes.
In both the papers, both the eJolts papers that I've put at the end of my slide, both of them refer to the influence of those reviewers and helping me to recognize where I have made insufficiently clear how I am demonstrating my values in my practice. And so it's that sense, the action research sense of having a critical friend. I have always used that since I discovered action research to discuss the out there issues that I was investigating. But living educational theory work encourages me, as I said before, to hold that mirror up to my own face. And even looking at my own face, I don't see all the warts and the blemishes. But the friends who are reviewing those papers will help me to see that work. I also should have mentioned while I was talking, another writer whose work has probably been very seminal to my development, the American writer Parker J. Palmer, who wrote an amazing book called The Courage to Teach. And again, as with living educational theory authors, he's searingly self-critical about his own practice and how he denies his values in his practice and how we can teach from a heart of love, I think is the way he puts it.
Wow, that's such a super answer. Thank you very much. And there's one which is, I know, right for me because it's about life skills. The question is, how in this present pandemic situation can a teacher develop creativeness and life skills among students for the better of society? Yes, it's very difficult, but I know that I've actually managed to do it online. Just go into all the theories and make some great activities, attention-grabbing activities for the students. For example, when I started teaching listening skills to my students, I created a whole volume of songs which were only instrumental. The instrumental version of all songs. And in the first, as soon as I started the class, the first thing I would challenge my students to guess the song. So I would play 6, 7 numbers which were just instrumental. And then they had to guess the song. And then I would do a fastest finger first and say, next time, which is the musician or the singer you want to listen to. And then, in the chat, I would get something and then I would work on it. The other thing is that I started, because I could not use drama in education, I used cinema in education. And I made clips from popular films to demonstrate the learning. And I think I have managed really well because my students have done some awesome work and they've gone ahead and done their research in it. My students have gone and taught 8th standard and 9th standard students, and they've done it online. So I think that they really grasped that type of learning. Jack and all of them saw a presentation by them just yesterday at the Action Research Network of America, the conference. And it's tough, but I think if you want to do it, you can find a way. There's a lot of resources on the internet. And like I told you, write to me. Again, my email ID is nemlifeskills@gmail.com. Write to me, I will help you. So I think we're running sadly towards the end of the webinar. It's so nice to be sitting with friends and talking. But before the formal thank you, I would like to say thank you. I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Shirish Kulkarni of Sardar Patel, he is so encouraging. Somehow I never feel that I'm talking to a vice chancellor. I always feel as I'm talking to somebody like maybe an elder brother who's giving me advice and kind of encouraging me to do lots for my students. I'd like to thank the registrar, Dr. Jyoti Tiwari, for her support. Jack, of course, who I call my guru. I've learned so much from you, Jack. I don't know how I would have survived without you. And Pip, my dear friend on the editorial board with me, and you've taught me so many things. So I really thank you for taking off so much time to join us for this webinar. But there's one other person I would like to thank very much. Somebody I met recently, just 3-4 years back. She came to my office to meet me from a city called Vallabh Vidyanagar. And she said, I have read a paper of yours in your journal, educational journal, and I would like you to come to my university to teach. Thank you, Shivani, Dr. Shivani Mishra. She has been an awesome friend and a critical friend and a peer and a colleague who supported any idea. And, people who know me know that I have crazy ideas sometimes. And she supported every crazy idea because she said, I just want my students to learn. So I want to thank you, Shivani, very much for what you have done. And this webinar actually is because one day I was talking to Shivani and I said, I want people to understand the living educational theory in India. Like I taught you and I taught the students at the Sardar Patel University. I want other people to learn the educational living theory. And so she comes up to me and she says, ma'am, let's do a webinar. So this webinar is because she's in a very indirect way fulfilling my wish. Thank you very much, Shivani, for everything you do for me. Mukshita, over to you.
So thank you so much, all the panel members. Today, actually 4 knowledge partners we have, but 2 have joined with us from the EJOLS and 1 from Learning Come. So if they want to say something, we have another 1 minute to go.
So should we ask Subbu first and then Murray?
Yeah, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Swaroop. Thank you, Dr. Mishra, for letting us be part of this. It's been a new area for us, I think, and this is so interesting. I think deeply rooted in reflection, deeply rooted in insights, in your own practice, in your own values, and based on some of the work we do, I think things like living theory has tremendous application to sort of enhance our own work as an organization. So absolutely delighted to be here, honored to meet such great people today, and I would love to sort of engage in some of those conversations and perhaps even write a paper myself.
Yes, I'm waiting for that.
So I should give it a shot. So wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Subbu. Thank you very much. Marie, would you like to say something?
Sorry, that rather took me by surprise.
Yeah, sorry. That's Shivani.
My head is so buzzing with what you've all been saying and how it actually connects and makes me want to really now get on with taking forward living educational theory research, understanding the practice of it and what the difference that can make. And what Pip was saying and Jack has been saying, I really hope that people here will go into eJolts and have a look and see whether they want to start actually formulating their paper, because actually in the formulation of that paper and then submitting it, it might actually do what it is that Pip really, I've got your quote, Pip, that was a fantastic quote. I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. And in developing a living educational theory research paper, then I learn to do better. And in the course of that, I do better. And as Pip was saying, the open review process part of it is where people are actually engaged in those really difficult, critical responses that they work with creatively, so that we can have a confidence that we are not deluding ourselves. And for very good reason. I want to delude myself as much as anybody else, and we'll try and really resist anybody who says, oh, actually, Marie, you're not quite doing that. But the way that happens in the open review process, I think would be very helpful to each person as they're working on their paper. And in the process of it, they are actually making that knowledge globally available. And I think that's really important, because it's about the flourishing of humanity, not just humanity surviving, but the flourishing of our humanity, on how as a species we flourish and take into account what other people are working on globally and our planet as well. So I do hope that you'll go onto eJolts, EJOLTS.net, and look at the submission criteria with the paper. And as you begin to work on that, and with your colleagues, and what Swaroop and students and everybody are actually doing, so you've got lots of people to work with, and in that journey too, you're actually bringing into being the very form of flourishing of humanity that we're wanting to see exist and happening. So I do hope you will go onto there and think about actually working on a paper.
Thank you, Marie. And Marie, would you like to announce that our next edition is going to be out in June?
Oh, yes.
And everybody should read it.
Yes. So, you lucky people, you've got you're the first people to get this forewarning that there's a special June issue. And I don't want to say too much more, because I think you will go in and actually find a surprise. And I don't want to spoil the surprise.
Yes,
that's what you find there, because it is actually a special issue. It's created a special issue, so that will definitely be published by the end of June, and we're working really hard to get it published before that. So keep checking, going on to ejolts.net, keep checking, and before the end of June, you will find, and I will leave you to actually see what will surprise, delight you, and hopefully inspire you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. Yes, just for everybody to know, Sardar Patel, Department of Sardar Patel, Shivani Mishra, Swaroop Raval, Jack Whitehead, Marie, and eJolts are all on Twitter. So you can definitely catch us there. Shivani, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, let me share take me only 1 second to go before I hand over to Mukshita. I was gifted by Swaroop ma'am the book of Jack Whitehead, The Living Theory as a Way of Life. And when I have to do a field work with the preschool children, then, that time I came to know that I never, consciously put my values in an actions. And this is how, after leaving theory, one the value which I always aspire to, and when I was studying during 97 in my social work program, I always said my teachers that, let our voice in our curriculum, so then nothing has happened because that's a traditional way of teaching. But through this theory, I came to know that, and I developed the value of self-directed learning. And then this is how you had seen that so many students, several students, faculty members, 3 faculty members over earlier 3 faculty members, they have started their own way of teaching in the class, right? And if they encourage, if they motivated, if they inspire, definitely student will be. So this is how this is the reason, I always said that living theory is very close to my heart, and that helps me to understand my own values, and I motivate others to put their values in an action. This is my second phase of understanding the living theory. Right now I'm looking for my third phase of living theory, is of disseminate the people, allow the have a more academic engagement, so that, in India, under the mentorship of Professor Jack and Swaroop ma'am, we can definitely involve more people on it. And if you came to know that so many people from the science background, and we have a top B schools, that of IIM, IIT, the participants are also from there, So living theory is not for, we never divide living theory in science and social science. Living theory is of a human being. And if you want to flourish a human being, and if you want to work on the well-being, I think you are on the right track and the right place to work on. Over to you, Mukshita. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.